Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Webinar Wednesday. As you might be familiar, the MRC hosts a webinar every Wednesday as part of our Webinar Wednesday series. Our webinars are open to everyone that wants to attend, so please check out our website for upcoming webinars. We haven't scheduled out all the way until December, so there's a lot of good webinars coming up. For this week's webinar, we have Arcos Labs presenting on hitting the fraudsters where it hurts. If you have questions during the webinar, please submit the questions through the question panel in GoToWebinar, and we will get to the questions at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'd like to introduce Lizzie Clitheroe and John Frost. Welcome.
Hi there, thank you Marcus, and thank you for having us. I'm Lizzie Clitheroe, Director of Product Marketing here at Arcos Labs, and with John, care to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Lizzie. We're excited to be here at MRC, the Webinar Wednesday. My role is a solutions engineer architect, and I work on things like the technical integrations, the pre and post sales, communicating with merchants on user updates, and looking at the data in detail.
Perfect. So, the way that we see fraud here at Arcos Labs is very much through the lens of economic drivers and the amount of effort and resources a fraudster will expend on an attack is ultimately down to the monetization potential. And then likewise, the minute a fraudster meets a level of resistance that starts to erode their ability to carry out attacks while still preserving ROI, that's when we see attacks drop off. Unfortunately, however, fraudsters have all this on their side: a complex set of services and solutions that enable them to tap into low-cost resources and toolkits from across the globe, carry out attacks at scale way beyond their ability, that a single person working on their own would be able to. You may have noticed one or two data breaches over the last few years, and this is all part of the fraud ecosystem. You've got data brokers, identity farms working together to get together these very comprehensive identity profiles or create synthetic identities, with fragments of legitimate identity credentials that can be used with great efficacy in fraud attacks. And another aspect of this ecosystem is the click farms or human sweatshops that we see cropping up across the globe. And these are teams, either people working physically together or distributed networks of folks with, connecting via apps or marketplaces to carry out attacks at scale, and also specifically there to evade current authentication steps and challenges. And a super interesting example of the wider fraud ecosystem at work is the malicious activity that we detected on a tech company we work with. John, can you take us through and explain what's happening here?
Sure, I'd love to explain that. What we are seeing is that when we worked with a particular code hosting company, their promotion was offering free server time and virtual machines. If I break it down, the business problem related to server time and credits being abused by bots to open new accounts at scale. And from what Lizzie said earlier on the previous slide on the different vectors, what we're seeing is that those are coming into play. So what I'm talking about is like coders are using scripts, human workers using those identity farms, and in this case, they created fake accounts to mine crypto, since it's very energy intensive to do so today. So the solution was that Arcos got deployed on the registration page to stop the bot attacks, and we utilized the 3D enforcement challenges, which caused all automation attacks to fail. Thus, with our results, we got a 90% reduction in promotional credit abuse. We stamped out the bot-driven attacks and provided better overall experience for their legitimate users, which we're extremely proud of for doing that for them.
Nice, there's some cool stats there. As underpinning the cybercrime ecosystem are global socioeconomic factors that impact individuals' appetite to even get involved in this kind of activity, and also the costs, the low costs at which these sort of support services are on offer for. You've got disparities in wages, cost of labour, different unemployment rates, and even like the comparative purchasing power of one currency to another from different countries. These shift the incentive levels of would-be fraudsters. For example, say you're a budding fraudster in Russia, and you've got the opportunity to either attack a local company or say an American company that when the USD is 4 times the value of the Russian ruble, which one are you going to go for, right? And then on top of these economic drivers, you have different regions and different countries have different access to the technology even required to launch large-scale fraud attacks. So another example, say Ethiopia, which has very low purchasing power parity when it comes to its currency, but there's a 15% penetration rate of internet use among its citizens. So for the time being, it's unlikely to become a fraud hub. And so this is where we get this attack incentive index, which is really trying to call out areas most susceptible to involvement in cybercrime, either for those individuals actually perpetrating attacks directly, or those providing shadow services which prop up the organised fraud ecosystem. And so this is based on regional economic data combined with what we actually see in the real world from attacks. So we see, for example, Russia, the Philippines, Indonesia are consistently pretty high up there in the most attacking countries, or where attacks are originating from our network. And so currently we are living at a time of great economic uncertainty. We probably all know somebody or even multiple people who have had their way of making a living ripped out from them due to either directly from the COVID shutdowns, or due to the ramifications that are being felt across economies. And what do you do if you, for no fault of your own, are no longer able to provide and make a living in the way you're used to? Well, for some people, the answer has been cybercrime. And when looking at localized data from countries that have implemented strict lockdowns, we can see some pretty interesting attack trends. So you can see here, Italy and Peru both display this pronounced spike of sweatshop activity right around the times that lockdowns were announced. And I think this goes to show, first up, just that kind of human element, that human drive that is behind some of this activity, but also the staggering speed at which the organized fraud world will pivot and mobilize and change to adapt to changing circumstances, recruit people to get involved in this activity. So as a result, a lot of the companies that come work with us are facing attacks on the automated side, human-driven attacks, and kind of hybrid attacks. And John, could you just chat to us a little bit more about this, how it works, what companies are facing?
Yeah, this is a great flag we both like because it shows the life cycle of a fraudster. You've got it starting from large-scale attacks with lower costs, and then moving to small-scale attacks with higher costs. And remember, this needs to be economical, otherwise there's no point here for the fraudsters. So fraudsters are testing where they can profit and at what stage. If we look at this slide in detail and break it down, one, you have the primary fraudsters, so usually not one actor, but many looking for economic benefits. The second one is the bot attack relating to, could be like scripts, testing usernames and passwords, etc. Obviously varies based upon the company they're targeting. 3, bots coded to escalate on a challenge, relates to the machine learning automation. And 4, you've got the distributed sweatshop workers. Usually this occurs in lower wage countries from click farms are where a person might have multiple devices. And the fifth one is bypass authentication challenge. Fraudsters try to pass without friction, obviously, and they'll try to automate it any way they can. And ARCOS has seen this occur with the majority of the merchants who we've worked with and helped. And essentially, this just sums up the life cycle of a fraudster.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I guess a lot of the sort of trying people solutions and ways to tackle certainly bots and automated fraud, it shows that you can't really, it's not just the automated problem. You have to have something that's set up to actually deal with both issues and the kind of the fluidity at which it happens with. And so to kind of highlight this, we've thrown a case study from a customer who is dealing with both automated and human fraud attacks. John, can you chat us through what's happening here?
Yeah, sure. Interesting enough, what we see here is that when we've worked with a gift card and financial services company, their business problem was that fraudsters can easily profit from prepaid gift cards to cash, which is essentially hard to trace. Usually in these situations where you get a fast reward, you'll get a lot of fraudsters, and usually the best fraudsters. Also with this case, additionally, the merchant had very persistent attacks occurring from both bots and human fraud rings. Previously, they did have a solution in place with a reCAPTCHA, but it didn't stop most of their attacks and created a bad user experience. The merchant couldn't get any insights into how they can manage their fraud. So the solution was the ARCOS platform. It could distinguish the good users from the bad. I'm talking about the bots and the human fraud rings, and it didn't have an impact on the good user throughput. This was done obviously by the enforcement challenge, and it stopped bots entirely and removed the efficiency of those click farms that I mentioned. From a results perspective, there was better user experience compared to the previous fraud solution with, as I said, with higher throughput rate. And only after a week, there was a 98% reduction in bot attacks, a 60% reduction in human-driven fraud. And we continue to evolve that relationship as it does help the other companies in the ARCOS network.
Yeah, it's nice to see kind of, people being able to implement different solutions or different approaches and having quite quick results and seeing good stuff from that. Yeah. So naturally, we've been keeping an eye on fraud attacks and fraud rates since the beginning of the year, as it's been somewhat of an interesting year. And just as a bit of a snapshot for some of the data, that overall digital activity has been up. And especially in the first quarter, attack rates were elevated, and then since then we have just seen a lot of volatility. And to be honest, kind of expect volatility to be the watchword for the foreseeable. And who's most at risk? So going from our Q1 data, the e-commerce retail sector is the group of companies that we're seeing the biggest jump in attack rates. And this really is down to both the fact that there was such elevated online activity, fraudsters notice these things naturally, and also increased profitability of some of the kind of more fringe abuse activity such as inventory hoarding, scraping. In the gaming world, we were chatting to one of our gaming customers, must have been sort of a month and a half into COVID lockdowns beginning, and made the comment that every day is a holiday at the moment, that usually the gaming sector would expect sort of spikes of the weekends, spikes of the evenings, if kids are off school during the holidays. And that was just kind of the normal consumer behavior is just out of the window at the moment. And so seeing consistently high levels of activity, which was as a result leading to spikes in attack volumes. And then in the tech platform, so much of our personal and professional communications and collaboration moving online. This means increased traffic, new users, and the emergence of whole new subsectors like edtech. And so as a result, they were seeing kind of spikes in attacks. And one, sticking with the technology company theme, one company we work with, you may have heard of, Microsoft, who we just published a case study with them looking at how we deal with the Outlook.com product. John, can you chat us through what's happened here?
Yeah, for Microsoft Outlook, this is a super exciting case study, so let me dive into details and tell you more about it. The problem here was multifold. They had large-scale fake account registrations, and that committed like the downstream fraud. Email accounts used for malicious and fraudulent purposes like blackmail. And previously they had a SMS token, and you might have seen that, which was expensive for them, and they had and there was a workaround for that. Furthermore, this lowered the good user throughput and kind of was out of band in the authentication control there. So our solution, we provided this unified authentication for the new users. The enforcement challenge stopped the bots and the fraudsters. And lastly, the current malicious emails, we detected those and challenged them downstream. They say results are everything, and you know what, they truly are. What we saw was a 33% improvement in good user throughput, plus a 98% reduction in fraud and abuse. Furthermore, we stopped the complaints about the SMS verification, lowered their costs, and we rolled this out globally. And we also worked with them in supporting 100+ languages.
Nice. And I think one of the things I liked about this story is that Microsoft were keen to protect their own users, but also look kind of this wider ecosystem, stop people using their platform to abuse other kind of people that aren't even their customers. So yeah. So businesses coming up against this global cybercrime network, and actually deployed a bunch of different solutions to help. But the kind of like the cost balance sheet is not necessarily always in the business's favour. And fraudsters do have investment on their side, but they're able to cast their net globally, tap into services for all people within regions with low overheads and costs. Whereas the business side, they're experiencing more and more demands on budgets, more and more demands on their personnel. And one challenge here is this kind of vicious circle of so many companies do see a certain level of fraud as an inevitable cost of doing business. And the issue here is that, all the successful attacks that do take place kind of makes the whole, problem worse, in that they know how to better attack businesses. They're able to reinvest the proceeds and the funds that they've generated from cybercrime and fraud into more sophisticated toolkits and greater and more comprehensive data sets or new identity credentials. And that's one of the reasons we're seeing, despite all the investment on the business side, that attack rates are still, the fraud rates are still on the rise. And so on one side, you have genuine customers who can act somewhat erratically at times, especially during the COVID-19 crisis, when the kind of like normal online behavior has been in flux like never before. So it's really hard to baseline what kind of a trusted user transaction patterns look like. And then on the flip side, you've got these attackers who are using more sophisticated tools, more able to use bots to more accurately mimic legitimate human behavior. And as a result, what we're seeing is when relying purely on data-driven sort of behind the scenes RBA type systems, there's more and more of traffic that's falling into this grey area between obviously trusted and obviously malicious. A lot of systems kind of looking for extremes in data or sort of real outliers, and it's just not really kind of adapting to the current threat landscape where fraudsters are very good at acting like a real person. And it's actually one of the issues that was flagged in a recent report, the Cool Vendors in IAM and Fraud report from Gartner, and talking about the fact that a lot of mitigation focused strategies that use reliability and threat scoring or behavioral analysis just aren't quite enough to truly overcome fraud and abuse in the current state. And but if you're if these sort of behind the scenes systems aren't truly cutting it, what can you do to bring in more robust fraud prevention without killing conversion rates? And so again, this is a big focus of the Gartner report, really more innovative ways to deal with fraud in a robust way whilst helping user experience. And quick plug, you can head to the Arcos Labs website and get a copy of the report, a complimentary copy. One of the industries we work with a lot who is most concerned with the user experience, however, is facing a remarkable number of inventive attack patterns, is that of online gaming. So John, could you chat us through some of the the key issues that this sector is dealing with, or the pain points they're coming to us with?
Yeah, during this time with the COVID, the amount of fraud done in the gaming industry is increasing dramatically. And as you can see, here is a list of what we're seeing. Looking at this slide, we see majority of the fraud occurring in, roughly 6 of these areas. So if we look at the in-game abuse, the auction house abuse, the ATO, fake new accounts, the promo abuse, and the spam messages. That's where majority of the action is happening. There are other areas that are, it is occurring, but not to the extent of where it's happening in those other areas I mentioned. Again, because of the amount of fraud we are seeing through the gaming ecosystem, this only helps us identify and understand fraud and essentially where it's coming from.
Yeah. And just to back that up, just want to give a quick snapshot of some of the data that we've been seeing on the global network. So in the first 5-6 months of the year, there was a whopping 92% increase in the sheer volume of attacks that we saw specifically on gaming. So it's a pretty hot time for that industry right now. So what can we do about all this? So if you accept that it's economic drivers that's really the root of this evil, the minute we start undermining the ROI or the ability that fraudsters can, their ability to launch attacks whilst driving a profit, that's where we're going to get the biggest long-term impact. And so here's some advice from the Arcos Labs team on how to really actually get at that. So first up, classification of traffic, looking at real-time signals, looking at behavioral biometrics, and rather than going beyond a bunch of different risk scores, it's really about classifying traffic based on probable intent. Does it look like a bot? Does it look like a sweatshop? Does it look like a good user? And in order to get truly actionable insights that can easily lead to remediation in real time. And next up is the interactive technology. So embedding interactive technology into your customer forms or any of the customer actions. When done correctly, this can eliminate the bot problem. And also, once you're going to get into this these challenges that users are dealing with, that can really sap the time and resources that fraudsters need, and eliminate their ability to do this at scale. And to ensure that this is really being directed at the baddies and not the goodies, a continuous feedback loop, really learning from when you marry up risk-based assessments along with interactive challenges, having a continuous feedback loop to really refine that process and make sure that hardly any actual good users are seeing the challenges. And so ultimately, what we're looking to do is first up, disrupt the tools that fraudsters are using, whether it be bots, whether it be sweatshops. And in doing so, making it just like just far more costly to attack, so your website or app ceases to be even a particularly desirable target for a fraudster. And I think this is where we get into this long-term protection and move away from the kind of cat and mouse game of they've got this tech, we need to get that tech, and actually kind of really get to the root of the problem. And so to kind of see how this would work in through this slide, I will ask John to chat us through what here.
Yeah, as we discussed earlier in our earlier slide decks, this is relating to the life cycle of a fraudster. Here we're digging deeper though through our data from different industries to get an overall idea of the evolution and mitigation. So if we take a look further, in this typical case, example of what we see in the ecosystem, through each industry, it can be different based upon the different models. But if we look at this slide, you can see the successful bot attacks at the beginning in rose color, the failed bot attacks in the red color, the trained bots in purple, which you can see is a bit more spread out there, the human sweatshops, which is in the yellow, and the authentic traffic, which is in green. And you can see that starting from the beginning and kind of going all the way through there. And you want to have that, your legitimate users are unaffected, essentially, while, you've got a company such as Arcos, helping you, solve your fraud solutions. So in all, because fraud is up, and we at Arcos Labs are really getting a bird's eye view and seeing a number of different attacks, which is helping us to broaden our spectrum so we can mitigate any fraud and abuse that might come your way.
Cheers. And just throwing up a few resources for any further reading, if so desired, based on some of the content from the presentation. I got the Gartner Cool Vendor Report, an ebook we did specifically around what trends we're seeing around COVID-19, and a white paper that touches on some of the themes of this webinar as well. And with that, I'll pass it back to Marcus for any questions.
All right, thank you, Lizzie and John. We actually only have one question. I think we actually answered it here in the last slide. The question was, what was the name of the Gartner report you mentioned? How can I get a copy? So by visiting arcoslabs.com/resources.
Yeah, you can see it on the website. So it features about 5 different reports, 5 different vendors, including Arcos Labs. So yeah, go check it out.
Awesome. Yeah, really interesting. Thanks for the presentation. So for all the attendees, if you want to watch this again, we did record it. So you should receive a follow-up email from us with the links to the recording. MRC members are also going to have access to the recording of this webinar on our webpage. There's pretty much every webinar we do is recorded. So there's a lot of webinars there that people can listen to if they are MRC members. So with that, thanks a lot, Lizzie and John, for presenting the webinar. To the audience, thanks for attending. Make sure that you check out our website for upcoming webinars, sign up for those, and take a look at the MRC for all the other cool stuff we have coming up. All right.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye.
Bye.